purpose in this army?
To do whatever you tell me, drill sergeant?
God damn it, Gump! You're a goddamn genius. That's the most outstanding answer I've ever heard. You must have a goddamn IQ of 160. You are goddamn gifted, Private Gump.
Life in the army is very simple for Dan. He doesn't have to think, he just needs to obey orders. When assembling a firearm, Dan easily broke army record as he had no distractions.
Time, drill sergeant!
Go! Why did you put that weapon together so quickly, Gump?
You told me to, drill sergeant.
Jesus H. Christ! This is a new company record. If it wouldn't be a waste of such a damn fine enlisted men, I'd recommend you for OCS, Private Gump. You are going to be a general someday, Gump. Now, disassemble your weapon and continue.
Because of spinal problems when he was a child, the doctor put him in a brace, but due to the wobbly walk, he often gets strange looks from around. Fortunately, whenever this time, Mother will patiently tell Dan,
"You're the same as everybody else. You are no different."
However, at school age, the principal refused to accept as Dan was mentally disabled.
His IQ is 75. The state requires a minimum IQ of 80 to attend public school, Mrs. Gump. He's gonna have to go to a special school.
But Dan Mother did not compromise. After a series of arguments, the principal finally decided to give Dan a chance. On the first day of school, all the classmates are bullying Dan. Only Jenny is willing to be Dan's friend. They read and climbed trees together. The two were inseparable throughout childhood. This day, a few boys are bullying Dan. The helpless Jenny can only tell him to run away quickly. Dan ran very slowly at first, but just as the other was about to catch up him, a miracle happened. With Dan breaking free from the shackle, he runs faster and faster. Just a few seconds, he left the boys behind. 10 years passed. Dan and Jenny are both in high school too. The boy bullied him also changed his bicycle into a car. Seeing about to be knocked down, Dan ran into a stadium in a panic. The speed like lightning shocked the whole stadium, and this scene was seen by the coach. So by such a coincidence, Dan was successfully recommended to college. Became a football player, but the stubborn Dan doesn't know the rules of the court. He only know run desperately after getting the ball. So under the efforts of Dan, the team won one victory after another. He also entered the All-Star team, even met the President of the United States. Few years passed, Dan successfully graduated from college. This made the mother in the audience very pleased. Just when the two about to take a group photo, an officer came over. As Dan talent is different from ordinary people, so he recommended Dan to join the army. Although the life of the army is a bit boring, but fortunately Dan met his friend Babu. He's like a chatterbox. Every day he talked to Dan about the shrimp boat. Even planned to buy a boat after retiring with Dan to start a business. But late at night, Dan still can't help but think of Jenny. So on the day of vacation, he came to the bar where Jenny was stationed, just to see a guest bullying Jenny. He went forward without saying a word and beat the person. Jenny walked out of the bar and told Dan he can't always come to help her. But actually, she didn't want Dan to see her in a mess. Then she stopped a car and wanted to leave.
They sending me to Vietnam.
Listen, you promised me something, okay? Just if you're ever in trouble, don't try to be brave. You just run, okay? Just run away.
Okay.
No long after, Dan and Babu was sent to the battlefield, not like imagined. There's no such thing as gunfire here, only the endless heavy rain every day. Until this day, Dan Company encountered an ambush. Watching his comrades suffer heavy casualties, the lieutenant ordered to retreat, and they obey Dan run like a horse setting free. In a few time he ran first out of the battlefield. Thinking Babu is still there, Dan hurried back again. He saw many wounded comrades on the road. Without thinking he carried them all to safety, even rescued the lieutenant who wanted to die.
I can't leave the platoon! I told you to leave me there, Gump! Forget about me! Get yourself out!
Although many comrades were rescued, but Dan never found Babu. The lieutenant told him not to go in again, as the support troops are about to launch an artillery blockade. But Dan is not willing to give up. Risking his life, he ran back to the war zone again. Fortunately, he finally found the Babu. However, when Dan rescued him, only to find the shooting Babu was already seriously injured. Before he died, he entrusted Dan, "Be sure to fulfill the dream of two people catching shrimp while rescuing teammates." Dan got a shot in the ass, and the lieutenant lost his legs forever. That night he dragged Dan out of bed. Ask him why he saved himself. If not Dan, he won't be reduced to such a level. Dan couldn't understand what the lieutenant said. He obviously saved his life, but in the end it seems like he did something wrong. After returning, Dan was personally inspired by the president, and even awarded the Medal of Honor. His deeds of saving lives spread throughout the country. By chance Dan was pulled onto the stage to give a peace speech, but next second, he saw Jenny, who hadn't seen for many years before him. And Jenny also told Dan she have found the direction of her dreams. This made Dan look a bit lost, because he knows freedom-loving Jenny won't stay by his side. To parting day, he gave his medal to Jenny. Watching the bus going away, Dan sent away his true love again like this. After retiring, Dan meets Taylor again, but at this time he was drinking heavily every day. After the two came to a bar, Dan told Central Defender he promised the dead Bob would fulfill the dream of catching shrimp. But Lieutenant Mockton said, if you can be the captain, then I will be your first mate. But Lieutenant World have thought of it. Dan actually came to Babu's hometown and spent all his savings on a shrimp boat. But catching shrimp is not as easy as imagined. Inexperienced Dan catches all kinds of rubbish every time. Seeing this scene, the uncle next to him suggested Dan give the boat a name. Maybe it will bring him good luck. So Dan didn't even think about it. Just put Jenny's name on it. This day he drives Jenny as usual, but accidentally saw the lieutenant on the shore. It turned out he was fulfilling his original promise.
I told you if you were ever a shrimp boat captain, then I'd be your first mate.
Did not expect. The two went to sea for the first time, encountered severe typhoon weather. All ships were destroyed by the typhoon. Only the Jenny of the two is not a big deal, because there is no competition. In the following time, the two made a lot of money. With the first pot of gold, he just bought more fishing boats and started his own company. Watching life get better and better, Lieutenant seems to have found a way to live. Looking at the man before who saved him, he finally said belated thank you.
I never thanked you for saving my life.
This day Dan received news that his mother was seriously ill. He hurriedly put down his work and hurried home anxiously. Before his mother died, she told Dan, don't be afraid, because death is also part of life.
Life is a box of chocolates, Forrest. You never know what you're gonna get.
Since mother passed away, Dan left everything to the lieutenant. Didn't expect a few years later, he turned into a billionaire. Dan always remembers what his mother said, as long as the money is enough. So he used all the extra money for charity. Even took some shares to Bob's mother. Till this day he mowed the lawn as usual. Suddenly he noticed a woman walking towards him.
Hello, Forrest.
Hello, Jenny.
From this day on, Dan is no longer alone. They are inseparable as evers. Watching the sunset from the old tree, talk about endless topics. Dan puts flowers in Jenny's room every day, and Jenny will often teach Dan to dance. For Dan, this is the happiest time of his life. Finally tonight, Dan mustered the courage to propose to Jenny.
Will you marry me?
You don't want to marry me.
The next morning Dan came to Jenny's room, but he found out she had already left here. Also left the medal on the table. In this way Dan became alone again. Maybe Dan will never understand. Two people are so in love, but why is he still being rejected? Dan, who couldn't find the answer, put hat on. Then he ran all the way from home. He ran out of town, across the county town, without the slightest tiredness, and even across the entire state of Alabama. In a few years, he is always running except for eating and sleeping. Over time more and more people are paying attention to Dan. Dan made no response from interview with the media, but the more so, the more people feel Dan is a performance artist. So under the leading of Dan, countless followers joined the team. A businessman sees a business opportunity. He wants to print Dan's face on t-shirt, but at this moment a large car passed by, splashed the mud all over Dan. Dan took the t-shirt and wiped it casually. Just a simple gesture. It will become the future of American Tide brand clothing. Some time has passed. Dan finally stopped. Lasted more than 3 years. Dan, physically and mentally exhausted, wants to go home. Soon after, Dan received a letter from Jenny. He directly went to the address on the letter. Meet again. Jenny seems to be full of life and had a son.
His name's Forrest.
Like me.
You're his daddy, Forrest.
Not long after Jenny left last time, she realized she was pregnant with Dan's child. Dan, who knows the news, seemed a little overwhelmed. It's not he can't accept the child, but worried he would be mentally disabled like himself. Fortunately, Jenny told Dan their children are very smart. Just when Dan breathed a sigh of relief, Jenny tells him another bad news. Jenny has little life left as she is terminally ill, so she hopes to entrust the child to Dan before she dies.
Would you marry me, Forrest?
On the wedding day, the lieutenant wearing a prosthetic also came to congratulate. Under the witness of many relatives and friends, Dan and Jenny finally got married. But the time of happiness is so short. Not long after Jenny passed away, but this time Dan did not lose his way, as there is not only one more responsibility in his life. At the same time, there is an extra companion. He sent his son to the school bus like a mother once.
Hey, Forrest. I want to tell you I love you.
I love you too, Daddy.